Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Wilson, the director of Ciencia, and I'd like to thank you for attending today's lecture. This year's series is on the topic of creativity, and while people around Rice differ in the questions we ask and the methods we use across the many disciplines here, I think what unites us all is a creative impulse that we bring to our work. So this year's Ciencia is calling on different people from a variety of disciplines that we have to talk about how their imagination works, to tackle interesting questions, and to pose novel ideas. Well, today we're fortunate to have Alison Weaver speaking to us on the topic of what role can the arts play in fostering creative thinking across disciplines. And fortunately for all of us, Alison has brought us paper and colored pencils to accent her lecture, I suspect. Alison Weaver was named founding executive director of Rice University's Moody Center for the Arts in July of 2015, and is filling the Moody Center with a variety of projects since the building was completed in 2017. Prior to coming to Rice, Weaver was the director of affiliates for the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and at the Guggenheim led its programs and operations in Berlin, Bilbao, Venice, and Las Vegas. Weaver has a Master of Arts degree from Williams College, and a Master in Philosophy and Art History from the City University of New York. She also holds an MBA from Yale University and a BA cum laude from Princeton University. So a very well-rounded person. Her presence has already been felt at Rice. For instance, just a little over a month ago, she orchestrated a special performance and panel of members from Yo-Yo Ma's Silk Road Ensemble. This is on top of the many events that the Moody Center has already put on. So whenever you get an opportunity, please go over there. It's a wonderful facility, and Alison is doing a fabulous job in bringing together people from around the world and across the Rice community. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Alison Weaver. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Great. Thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Rick, for that kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here to speak with you about a topic that I'm passionate about, which is the role of the arts in fostering thinking across disciplines, particularly in a world that can be seemingly driven by technology and certainly rapidly changing. So I appreciate you all coming today, and I look forward to what I hope will be an exciting dialogue. I'm going to speak for a bit, and then I will open up the floor for questions, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. As we all know, we're living in a time of rapid change, when science and technology are at the forefront of global conversations, both in terms of culture and in terms of pedagogy. It can sometimes feel as if the arts, as we traditionally think of them, fields such as painting, photography, music, opera, dance, are kind of a quaint entertainment, a pastime for the privileged few who have enough leisure time and disposable income to attend musical performances or visit museums. This perception encourages us to allocate activities into discrete buckets. Science here, arts here, engineering here, with seemingly little overlap. What I'd like to talk with you about today is the notion that science and technology are profoundly intertwined. They're also profoundly influenced by the arts. And in turn, the arts are deeply indebted to science and technology for some of their greatest advancements. So here we're looking at Leonardo's drawing of a cannon. So he's concurrently interested in the physics of a cannonball and the trajectory of it as it flies through space. He's interested in the engineering of the cannon itself as a tool for scientific, as a scientific tool for propelling the cannonball. And at the same time, he's made a quite modern drawing that represents this phenomenon from multiple perspectives at once. So both the moment that the cannonball leaves the cannon, as it flies through the air, and as it both lands in the ground and scatters into shrapnel. So it's really an example of physics, engineering, and art all operating together at the same time. Without the intertwining of disciplines, we would not have some of the most significant breakthroughs in each field. In fact, I would go so far as to say that some of the most original ideas result precisely when diverse fields collide, like cannonballs. So how can we as educators create the conditions for collision? It's important to state at the outset that I'm not a scholar of creativity. And unlike my good friend and colleague, Tony Brandt, who some of you heard from earlier in the series, I have not written a book about creativity. So I'm going to speak today from examples both from my own field of expertise, which is the history of art, but also from projects we've presented at Rice's new Moody Center for the Arts, where I'm fortunate enough to be able to foster and observe experimentation in the field as it's happening. At the Moody, we're actively engaged in such questions as, how do art, science, and technology relate to each other? In what ways are artists currently using technology to achieve creative breakthroughs? And conversely, in what ways do the arts inform science and technology? More broadly speaking, the ongoing question is, what role can the arts play fostering creative thinking across diverse disciplines? It's particularly exciting to be engaging with these questions at Rice, an institution that has understood from its inception that these fields are intertwined. And as you can see here from the original academic seal of the university, there has always been an emphasis on science together with the letters and the arts. I was just speaking the other day with Edgar Odell Levitt's granddaughter, Mary Helen McLean, and some of you may know that Edgar Odell Levitt is the original president of Rice. And Mary Hale told me that her grandfather used to say, if you start with science and engineering, the arts and humanities will follow. My question is, what makes him so sure? I'm going to try to answer that question and there's Mr. Levitt. I'm going to try to answer that question by looking back into the history of art. Because despite the rapid pace of technological change today, this has been a long-standing dialectic. The conversation between these fields continues today, but it goes back in time. So I'm going to show examples from history, but then also from contemporary artists who are using science and technology to extraordinary ends. And then we'll look at creative pedagogical examples of classes here at Rice and how they are broaching this subject as in an experimental form right here across campus. So I'm going to start with the history of photography. It's a good place to start because it combines art and technology and has done so since its inception. The German photographer Thomas Struth, who I'll talk more about in a minute, has said that the camera is a scientific tool for psychological exploration. It's a machine, a man-made feat of engineering that allows us to see our world in new and inspiring ways. The forerunner of the modern camera, the camera obscura, goes back to Leonardo da Vinci, who provided the first detailed description of the pinhole camera in the Codex Atlanticus, which is roughly dates from late 1400s to early 1500s. Then during the 17th century, as many of you may know, the Dutch masters, like Johannes Vermeer, made use of the pinhole camera to make these handmade masterpieces, which are renowned for their meticulous attention to detail and their control of optics. In 1826, Joseph Niepce captured an image on a bitumen-coated metal plate using a pinhole camera to produce the first photographic image, which he called a heliograph. After his colleague Louis Daguerre improved the process, daguerreotypes were born, ushering in the age of modern photography. By the middle of the 19th century, cameras were commonplace and photography had taken hold as both a new technology and an artistic medium. As an example of the ways in which this new technology influenced art, I'd like to briefly discuss the work of the French artist Edgar Degas. And here we have a beautiful work that's in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of New York called The Rehearsal of the Ballet on Stage. Degas was a noted innovator on many fronts. First of all, his subject matter was quite modern and innovative. He depicted horse races, ballet dancers, milliners, washerwomen. These were topics that were not fitting into the traditional top genres, let's say, of history, painting, portraiture, and still life, so were quite radical. He was also experimental in his use of media, So in this case, he's mixing oil paint with turpentine. He's putting watercolor and pastel over a pen and ink drawing. So it's a truly modern mixed media piece made in 1874, quite radical for the time. But perhaps what Degas is most known for as an innovator is his composition. And you can see in this particular work how unusual it is to have in the foreground the tops of cellos, which are jutting up into the space. In the middle ground, the conductor with ballerinas at various stages of movement and rest and motion. And then in the background, this sort of side view of the stage set, revealing the back of house, which was quite unusual for the time as well. All of this is very much inspired by photography. So he was looking at photographs in a way, capturing the instantaneity that Impressionist school was so interested in, but instead of being outside en plein air, painting real time, these were very calculated studies that he did from drawings, but he's giving it the spontaneity of a snapshot. So as we would be today, you'd be perched in that box on the side of the opera and take a picture with your phone, and you would capture that very different composition that you see here. So the blurred action and dramatic cropping of these figures and forms reveal those conventions adopted from photography, which he also practiced. He took up the camera and made photographs himself. And it signaled that spirit of the technology informing the work of art. And then he would go on to inform the technology by using the camera, and at the time there were a lot of advancements in stop motion and development and chemical processing. So these interminglings of conversations continue to the present. When we opened the Moody Center for the Arts last year, we began with an exhibition by the German photographer Thomas Struth, who I just mentioned. For the past decade, Struth has photographed these techno-industrial and scientific research spaces. So he's going into particle colliders, into spaces in NASA, into chemistry labs. And he's exploring both the topic of technological innovation, but also the constructed or man-made landscape. He's reconsidering how imagination and fantasy works in our collective minds to show how science and technology shape our current reality. So they're really, I think it's easier if we look at one in particular. So let's go into this one. This is Z-Pinch Plasma Lab from 2011. It's a large-scale inkjet print, which I hope some of you saw in our presentation last year. The Z-Pinch or Zeta Pinch is a device that generates magnetic fields to produce fusion power by compressing plasma. It preceded the tokamak accelerator experiments, which Struth also photographed and were in the exhibition. And despite this machine's obvious complexity, some of its components are recognizable. So you can see, for example, this wooden stool, or this is a sort of an older vacuum, and there are all these cords and kind of, there's a bit of the handmade quality to this very complex, that complex machine, which doesn't indicate its function. So for those of us who don't know anything about plasma or plasma physics, it's inscrutable. We can see the technology of it, but we can also see that it's quite handmade. So Struth is fascinated by that dialectic between, these are the machines that define our world, but few of us understand them. So how can he as an artist present them to us in ways that help us grasp both the natural and the man-made world and that relationship between them? This was a second work that we had in the show. It's a very large scale. It's about the size of, almost the size of that screen. And it's called GREAT. GREAT stands for German Receiver for Astronomy at Terahertz Frequencies. It is an infrared spectrometer telescope that gives visible form to astronomical phenomenon that the human eye can't see and the human mind can only imagine. So what that means to the rest of us is that you're looking at the back of an airplane that goes up into the atmosphere and through satellite imagery captures information from the universe that helps us try to better understand the Big Bang. So it's a highly scientific instrument, but it's made entirely from the human imagination. So Struth calls these landscapes of the human mind. So instead of having a traditional landscape, as Degas' peers would have in the 19th century, you're representing the outside world, Struth is basically saying this is the modern landscape. This is what our world is comprised of. It's helping us understand the natural world, but at the same time, if you are inside this, you're quite far from the land, right? You're not living close to nature. So he's interested in that dichotomy, and I want to read a quote that he gave about this interest. He said, "I want to reconsider how the process of imagination and fantasy works in general, and how something which is built up in someone's mind has materialized to become a reality." So he said, "I want to reconsider how the process of imagination and fantasy works in general, how something which is built up in someone's mind has materialized and become reality. The German expression, sich etwas ausmalen, to paint something in one's head, refers to picturing capacity of the human brain. It's a condition without which we cannot create anything." End of quote. So I think this is an example of how an artist's vision of our technological universe is feeding back into our cultural conversation about the dialogue between the man-made and the natural world. And so these are the kinds of things that art can prompt thought and conversation around these very complicated topics. And our critical point of that, the imaginary world, is what in fact leads to the scientific breakthroughs that are required to make something great. Pun intended. Following Thomas's work, we presented a fantastic installation by Josiah McElhaney called Island Universe. This was a monumental installation of 5 hanging sculptures. And what we're looking at is a visualization of the multiverse theory of eternal inflation, which is a version of the Big Bang. So there's an astrophysicist at Stanford named Andre Linde, and he's come up with this concept that is, if we are living in the Big Bang as we know it, which is an eternally expanding universe, that there are potentially parallel eternally expanding universes around us. So this artist set out to determine how might you visually depict that. The artist worked with a cosmologist at Ohio State University named David Weinberg for 5 years, and he conceived a conceptually rigorous installation that's both visually stunning, but also carefully constructed according to measurements that map the history of time. So each sculpture represents a potential universe whose dense origin is expanding outwards. So the idea is that the origin of time matter is so dense there is no light. And then it's representing time as it expands outwards, and that ends in quasars and galaxies. So you can see in this depiction that the quasars are light, which are the brightest element in the universe, and each terminus is a galaxy, which is slowing and turning as it gets further away from the origin. So the Milky Way is an example of a galaxy. And this was calculated according to what we know about the Big Bang. So every 7.2 inches represents a doubling in space and time. So it wasn't arbitrary the way that it was designed. And it's also a feat of engineering the way they're fabricated. So they're made of chromed metal, transparent hand-blown glass, and lights. And they are also, what I love to this dialectic relationship, they are referencing an iconic mid-century design object, which is the chandeliers of the Metropolitan Opera in New York. So for those of you who have been there, there are these fabulous Sputnik-style chandeliers that receded to the ceiling when you arrived there. Those chandeliers were made by a firm called Loebmeyer in Vienna in 1965. And 1965 was the year the first physical evidence for the Big Bang theory became public. So that was something called cosmic microwave background radiation, or CMB radiation. That launched popular interest in space science, and importantly for the artist, it wasn't just a time of scientific ferment and exploration. It was also a time when modernism that began to break down. So there was a shift away from the linear narrative that we learned about progress. So progress coming through the Western civilization is a linear path to a more multivalent exploration, what we call in the humanities postmodernism. So he's linking both the science that's happening at the time with the development in the humanities. And in fact, when Josiah was here, he delivered the humanities lectures, the three-part humanities lectures, which was great. And we had very special talks by Chris Johns-Krool, an astrophysicist here at Rice, who's an expert on planet formation, and also the Big Bang Theory, and also by poets. So poets are creators of universes. So we had a really generative discussion around the ways in which both creators in visual and literary arts are in dialogue with this knowledge that we have at varying degrees of sophistication. And obviously when Chris Johns-Krool is speaking, the rest of us just listen. So this theme of art and technology is one that's important, I think, to our time, and it's one that we're interested in exploring at the Moody and here at Rice. So at the same time we opened the building, we installed this work by TeamLab. TeamLab is a Japanese collective. There are about 90 people, so it's not a singular artist, and I think that's important because part of what's changing in our creative universe is this idea going away from the creative genius to the ways in which collaboration is the way forward. So TeamLab is a collective of about 90 artists, architects, industrial designers, engineers, light experts. And they created this interactive piece called Flowers and People Cannot Be Controlled But Live Together, a whole year per hour. This addresses the theme of the seasons. It was inspired by a visit to the Kunisaki Peninsula in the spring, which is a beautiful place in Japan where the cherry blossoms were flowering on the mountains. And they very much wanted to reference the history of Japanese art, which is very tied to plant life and botany and landscape. But they're using the most sophisticated technology. So this installation consisted of 10 projectors and 16 sensors. And as you entered into the room, the sensors detected your presence, and they fed back to a computer, which then the artwork formed around your person. So flowers would come and land and bloom and then fade on your body. And it never repeats. So the way in which it's dynamic, it's an algorithm that's running off of those sensors and creating the work real time around your body. So this is a new frontier between the relationship between the art or artist, in this case a collective, and the viewer. So instead of looking at Degas' beautiful pastel and oil on paper, we are now participating in this interactive artwork that's making use of projection and sensor technology. At the same time, it's posing questions around what do humans plant, what's propagated by nature, what is our relationship to the natural and the technological world? That question we continued into the installation that's on you right now, so I encourage you all to go over it. This is by Texas-born artist Leo Villarreal. It's called Particle Chamber. And at the center of Leo Villarreal's work is a fascination with systems and the underlying rules that govern how structures work. Starting at the level of a pixel or the simplest unit, the artist adds elements within this defined framework until he reaches critical mass. And he's really thinking about the theories of mathematician John Conway and his work with cellular automata and the game of life. These elements move and morph according to parameters that he's written into a supercomputer. So he's set rules around density, speed, light, brightness, but within those rules, anything could happen. So again, it's running off an algorithm and a supercomputer. I like to say it's the visualization of computer code, but it never repeats. And it also creates an interesting interface between your senses as the visitor and the artwork. So you're in the work. This one is not interactive in the way TeamLab. It's not changing according to your presence. It's running, it's changing according to the algorithm that is happening behind the scenes. We're living in a moment when we're truly at the forefront of art and technology. And we want to be having those conversations here at Rice, so bringing together our experts from across fields. This is a really interesting new technology, and I would like to propose that this is something that signals the idea that we're living in the age of a new medium. So you can imagine if photography was invented in your lifetime, right? I think that we're at a moment where these technological tools are being invented in such a way that we as creators, all of us, as well as professional artists, will be learning and evolving how to use them over time, and what is their acceptance level at all levels of art history. So this is an app called Tilt Brush. It allows you to paint in 3 dimensions and a room-size scale. So we have this on view in a room, and you come in and you're able to put on virtual reality glasses and then create an entire world of your own making. And I'm actually gonna, I'm not promoting any particular company, but I do want to play the kind of promotional video that Google has put out about this, because I think it's really hard to describe if you haven't done VR before. And this video gives you a little bit of a sense of what would happen if you were able to do it. Great. So it gives you a sense of that 3 dimensions. So I think you can see that we're at the beginning of how we're going to experiment with these new tools to make artwork, but also ways in which those art forms can help people take problems back to their own fields of expertise and apply that vision. I would say overall, that what we have on view at the Moody now is exemplary of that kind of experimentation. So I hope you'll all come see The Demon in the Diagram, which is a work by Matthew Ritchie, which we just had a dance and music performance, which you see here. This is about the history of knowledge and how we diagram it from the earliest Greek poets until the present. So it also has a virtual reality component. And I think it's an example of the ways in which artists are grappling with both the past, whether it's looking back to Degas in photography or looking back to the ancient Greeks in the case of Matthew Ritchie, but then going forward to push themselves, how do you use these new tools and how can you incorporate them into an experiential exhibition or just putting work on view. So I encourage you all to come and check that out. Overall, I would say we are hoping to be at the Moody a lab for creativity. So offering spaces that allow these things to happen, putting on exhibitions like we've just seen. We're doing theater and dance, which I will brush over today, but some of you in the audience know a lot about. Public programs, student workshops with our makerspace, our Artists in Residence program where we're bringing artists to be in the space, be on campus, talking with students and visitors, and also our classes. So through these combination of activities, we're hoping to create the conditions for those collisions that I mentioned at the beginning, how we might create the opportunity for different fields to come together and with the inspiration of different projects, be inspired to think differently. So before we talk, I'm going to shift gears to talk about classes, but before we do that, now is the moment when you all get to become artists. So, Leonardo da Vinci said everyone is an artist, and starting in childhood, we're all making images. So I'd love for you to take out your paper and pencil, which hopefully you grabbed on your way in. And I'm going to invite you to make an image of a monster. So whatever you think of as monstrous or as other, just take a couple of minutes to sketch that out in any way, shape, or form that you're comfortable with. I'm going to let you do that. As you all are working on your monsters, I'm going to describe the inspiration for this exercise, which is a class taught here at Rice at Moody by our very own Mike Gaston and Deborah Harder. And many of you know Mike and Deborah. Mike is a professor of bioscience, and Deborah is a professor of European and Classical Studies. And they have been teaching a class for the past few years called Conceiving and Misconceiving the Monstrous in Fiction and Bioscience, Medicine, and Art. And instead of describing their course to you, which I was going to do, since they're both here in the audience today, I'm going to invite them up to describe it for you. Welcome, Mike and Deborah.
Cool. So my images are coming up first, but this is Deborah Harder, and I'm Mike Guston, as already introduced. And we teach this course together. I'm actually pretty loud.
But it's being videotaped.
Okay, so, all right.
You go ahead, since you'll go first, and then I'll pick it up.
So so we teach this course together. And we come from very different parts of the campus, intellectually, whatever. And so when we teach this course, we're in the class together at the same time. And we have a largely discussion-based class in which we have readings and which we explore different topics that often connect with each other across these different schools that we have here, these different areas. So I'm just going to talk about just a couple things that I would cover in sort of connecting to biology. And so one thing that's really important at the age that our students are, but just generally, is social signaling. Social signaling. How do people signal to each other? And so it's known from various studies and just observations that actually there are two smiles we have. We actually have the photographer smile and we have the warm smile. And studies have shown that people have strokes in certain parts of the brain, like say here, somewhere, have like a defect in the smile over here, and it will affect one of the two smiles. So only like have half the photographer smile, but have a full warm smile. And you can get the reverse as well. So this like brings into like how the brain works to generate these social signals and what happens. So I asked students to come up with examples of okay smiles and not okay smiles. Because smiles can mean different things. So a student sent in a picture of a friend. This was a student in the class, and so you can see maybe a warm smile and maybe like I'm not so sure a smile, right? And then here's a student who's about ready, from our class, apparently was about ready to jump out of a plane. Okay? But the next slide, which I think I control here. So we're not the only ones, right, who smile. It's rare, but dogs do smile. I once had a dog who smiles. I think my current dog doesn't smile at all. But anyways, so there's actually like, is this the evolution of a snarl into a smile? One possibility. And so how is the brain evolving in social signaling? So I would say that Deborah and I have brought together with the class people who, so there's Paul Hester and Josh Bernstein, who brought in a little more experience and mentoring the creative arts of our students. And so we put together different types of if you will, not projects, but if you will, endeavors for students to create art. And so one of the things we did was a math project. And so we covered some things about how the skin, human skin, especially as you grow older, is a mosaic. We have the same DNA to start with, but the DNA starts changing our skin because we are exposed to a lot of things that change the DNA, and that can affect lots of things. So this mosaicism plays out in different ways. So one student in our class, Ananda Avila, took this and plus some other things of her background. Her family originally came from Cuba. And so Amanda created this mask, okay, where she took a coconut and smashed it and then put it back together as a face. And this and a bunch of other masks. This is coming from someone. Amanda is like a biosciences type major. And this, I think, is really engaging for students to actually like create art that's connected in some way to biology, but also more importantly to the personal. So there's an undercurrent both of, like trying to figure out what we know, but also questioning with ourselves and other things. And I think this class does a lot for that. I can go, we can go forever about the class, but I'll turn the stage over to Deborah.
Great, great.
All right. Let me just say, it's rather shocking that Alison would give up some time in her talk to Mike and me to talk a little bit about this course. It's stunning and lovely for her to do that. Let me just say, I don't think there's any other course on this campus that is so interdisciplinary as ours. First, because we are not just from fields that are different, but within the same division. We are cross-divisional. And I have to say that my first comment about that is that it's rather shocking to teach with someone from whose work is so different, and yet also a pure joy, just a real joy to create. We're both there always, and whether we're talking about works that Mike has assigned the students or works that I have assigned the students, we are up in front arguing and talking and responding in our different ways. Every day for us is a kind of intellectual creative act. For the students, I think what they get is really marvelous, and I hope that there will be more courses like this in the future. C.P. Snow in 1959, as many of you know, talked about how we had become a culture divided, we become a world that was two cultures, the scientific and the humanistic, and that we were growing farther and farther apart. And the fact is, our students at Rice live this every day at Rice. They don't always get what each other are doing. That is to say, the STEM students are doing one thing, the humanists are doing another. In this class, what happens is that they get to look at something together, absolutely together, whether it's scientific, whether it's one of Mike's texts, or whether it's or problems, or whether it's one of a story or a piece of art that I'm talking about, and to be in awe of what their fellow students are able to say. So they'll hear what the humanist has to say, and they'll realize, oh my God, that's what I've been missing. The humanists will hear the scientists say, they'll hear them follow Mike so well. That also is shocking. I can't follow half of the readings myself. The students can. But there'll be moments where a scientist, a STEM student will say, well, this is true because it's a fact. And then the humanist will say, well, what do you mean, a fact? What's a fact? And the fact is, the idea of truth is very different for the scientist and for the humanist. But I must say, if it's great for Mike and me, and if it's great for the students, it is also has been remarkable to work with Alison and the Moody Center, because they have given us funds each year. I thought, one of the things I hate about working with Mike is that we both are good at coming up with ideas, but he actually wants to do them. So I'll say, oh, let's do this. And when he first first said, the first time we taught this, the student did their usual, for their final projects, they did, what our students always do, posters. And they thought about some very interesting things, but there's something very limiting about posters. And it was really Mike's idea. He said, let's have them do something that was in the arts, more directly. And I said, well, that's great. We're barely hanging on by our fingertips doing a course that is team taught between these two very different fields. But he didn't let up, and we were able to get support from the Moody, and it began with Paul Hester, a photographer. Now it has been Josh Bernstein. We now have a course that is science and the humanistic and the creative arts, and the combination is simply remarkable. And I'll just end by saying that. Mike, how do I do?
Just push the button.
Push what button? Okay. Yes, there we go. So when we did this mask project, you have to remember these are students who are science students, humanities students. These were not art students, and yet the masks were extraordinary. And I picked these out only because to give you an idea of the meaningfulness of talking about the monstrous. And when we talk about the monstrous, we do talk about vampires. But we can talk about why did we invent vampires? What does that say about ourselves? And lovers and aliens. Why do we call immigrants aliens? And questions of gender. There's so much to talk about. But in these masks, so we asked them with their masks to address, to create something that addressed anything at all that had grabbed their attention in the course of the semester, or something very personal. And what you see before you, the one in the middle is a mask based on a story that we read by Maupassant called Madame Hermé, about a woman who's very beautiful, who thinks that she's hideously ugly. The second, I won't spend too long, I want to give the microphone back to Alison. The one on the left was a runner at Rice, and she sweats. She says, I sweat. Everybody calls me, they have a name for her. She sweats so much. She says if she even thinks about something, she sweats. And it keeps, and we had them, of course, write something to go with their mask. When I sweat, my face becomes obscured by lines that streak downward and fly from the edges of my jaw. The liquid from my pores prompts a metamorphosis that transforms my visage into a shimmering, warped mirror, a face that is simultaneously disgusting and beautiful. It is quite clear that obsessive sweating is monstrous, particularly for a young woman like myself. I haven't even discussed the odor, visualized here by the green. The mask on the left, on your right actually, this was a student who had great difficulty in our class. I'm not sure why she signed up for it. She would have to leave the room regularly because it was hard for her to talk about certain things. And she didn't know what she was going to do, and she finally made this mask, and I'd like to read you just a little of what she said. In a class specializing in the monstrous, I was bested again and again by the monsters we studied. I would lie awake at night. I dreamt about torture machines and alien invasions. When the time came to make a mask, And truly, she wasn't going to be able to do it. I decided to make my own monster one who was unfazed by what she saw and heard. One who was dark like the woods and alive with nature, with horns to ward off the bad, and leaves sprouting from them to remind her that life is everywhere, and under it all, a human who is not afraid. And I was so moved by this mask, a monster that would protect her. Anyway, thank you very much, Alison.
Thank you both for sharing. I think that this idea of interdisciplinary classes that have a making component is something that we're also at the very beginning of exploring. How does that work? How does a bioscientist work with a humanities scholar? And then how do we translate that into hands-on learning? So I view that, what we're trying to do, broadly speaking, at Rice and at the Moody in particular, is foster those experiments. So I like to say it's an open source platform where we're really trying to invite people in to try those things and to varying degrees of effect. So it's quite a open, undetermined outcome. And I, in some sense, hope it will always be an open and undetermined outcome. So with that, I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions if you all want to ask anything of either myself or Mike and Deborah.
Well, first, let's thank Alison for her presentation. First question is, do we have to hand in our assignment?
Well, if anyone is proud of their monster, I'd be happy to, if you would like to describe your monster, that would be fine.
So I'll open it up for questions.
Oh, thank you. It was wonderful. Very, very interesting. That idea of I expected you to talk more about, learning about the arts and the importance of the arts in the mind and creativity, but to see the arts and technology come together is really fascinating. I was interested in the virtual reality, three-dimensional painting. Does that remain after the person? Can anybody else see it, or only the person who's got those glasses on? Is that really art if it disappears after it's gone?
Well, what's interesting about the tilt brush, you can actually save your sketch. So you could, in theory, create an infinitely expanding world by saving it in the program and then coming back to it. You can also color print it in 2 dimensions, and we're working towards a moment when you could color print it in 3 dimensions. So it could be that it's multivalent in that postmodern way. It's working on many different levels. So it's kind of the beginning of that technology, and what can people do with it from both a creative perspective, so what could an artist do, but also what can a scientist do. For example, I was recently reading about its use in pre-med courses because you can examine a skeleton from 3 dimensions. So instead of having, in the old days, you would have a hanging skeleton on, in a biology lab, you could actually now have one in virtual reality in which you're able to go into, let's say, the rib cage and look around. So it's really it's a beginning technology, and I think that's what makes it in some ways so fascinating.
So one thing that's particularly challenging when you're doing interdisciplinary studies is the language that's used. And what I found myself doing when you were describing some of these very large machines was sort of like marveling and like admiring your ability to handle all of those words and what was behind that. And it's a huge challenge when you're bringing technology and art together to really bridge that when we have oftentimes very different language. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that each discipline has a lexicon, right?
Yeah.
So how do we educate ourselves to a sufficient degree to communicate? Obviously, I have no mastery over the multiverse theory of eternal inflation, even though I can say those 3 words. I really don't, trust me. Many people at Rice do, other people do. I think that's part of it. I think that's why the visual is such a key component of the conversation. I think that art can be a wedge into the discourse which doesn't require mastery of the vocabulary. So when you see an image by Thomas Struth, you can begin to grapple with those concepts without having knowledge of plasma physics or vocabulary to speak it. And that's why I see the arts as being something that can't be isolated as a sidebar activity. So when we started the conversation with this idea that maybe the arts is sort of this elitist good that is not accessible to the rest of the population, I would argue the opposite, which is that the arts is actually the wedge into the broader conversation. It opens up the discourse for more people.
Alison, one of the things that Rice is not very good at is communication among different departments and divisions. And Mike and I have benefited so much from the Moody and from what goes on with Moody, but not everyone's aware of it. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas for how to change this, and I'm wondering if one idea might not be to begin putting on a newsletter, just something simple that, and in color at first, since you often have beautiful art exhibits up. But I think that there would be so many more people able to use it and to enjoy it if they had some idea of the range of things going on.
I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, in any organization, particularly a university, you have siloed fields of expertise, and people are physically located in different departments. They are intellectually pursuing different challenges. So how do you bridge that? And I think that there's no easy answer, but I would say that having the Moody as a physical space is a huge step in the right direction. So it's actually a radical act for a university to build a building that doesn't house a department. So having this physical space where people can come together and do things, whether it's in the makerspace, in the classroom, in one of the performance or exhibition spaces, is a beginning of that. I will say we work hard with the different projects to invite people in. So when working with Josiah McElhaney and reaching out to space science, or currently now working with Matthew Ritchie, who's our artist in residence, is working with 10 different classes that ranges from philosophy to math to literary theory to art history and visual art. So part of it is doing. I mean, you can always tell. I like to say, it's funny, I hesitated doing the talk today because I think it's better to show than to tell, right? So it's almost better if we could all, if I could have teleported you to the performance that we had Saturday night that was a dance and music performance in the installation, I think you would have all gotten this. We could have saved a lot of words. Right? You could just experience it in one go. And I think part of the challenge is through those experiences, making it available to as many different people as possible. But it's an ongoing project. I think that's going to take time.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much on behalf of Ciencia. It was a wonderful talk, and if you join me in